Hi, this is Stan. Well, we're not at Lakeside. We're traveling. We're on the road. We're over at Dave Dubel's place, the Vortex track, and we want to talk about tires for slot cars. Stay tuned. Well, Dave, thanks so much for having us over. You know, in my opinion, if you could only do one thing to a slot car, you buy it, you take it home, you take it out of the box. If you could only do one thing to that slot car, I think it would have to be tires, because the way we race in our club, our tracks are fairly dry. We don't stick them on the tracks. We don't use magnets in the cars. The one performance enhancing thing that I've seen has been slapping a pair of tires on the car. And here's an example of that. This is like a Hornby Scalextric car, inexpensive car, and this is box stock. It's got the stock guide. The only thing that was done to this car is we slapped some different tires on the back, and it takes it from a toy car into one that, especially on the short tracks, is very raceable and a lot of fun to drive. So Dave, what do you think? Do you think tires are that important?
Depending on the manufacturer and what they put on it, yes, they have the maximum effect if you only have a limited amount of room in your rules or in your budget to improve the car.
So we've got a display of some of the different cars. Not everything here we race. For example, look at this. This is a really cool HO car. Now, we don't race HO cars here on our club. Our tracks are set up for 1/32nd scale and 1/24th scale. And we typically run hard bodies, not 100% of the time. But Dave, give us an overview of the types of tires that we use in our club and why we use different compounds.
The reason why we use different compounds is kind of relative to the manufacturers and the types of cars that we race, and we've got a very, very broad spectrum of what we race. We aren't locked into any one thing. Typically, manufacturers put out the cars with an inexpensive type of rubber tire that is suitable for plastic tracks, and that's in their interest. They're really, for the most part, not making toys to race. They're making toys to play with, and so they'll have a system. They have a type of track, they have a type of car, and they have a specific type of tire. We typically race on handmade tracks rather than plastic. Sometimes race on a little plastic, but typically is wood and has a urethane finish on it, and so we can step things up a bit by adding a different tire material.
Now, we have club style tracks because guys like Dave, they've been racing a long time and they remember the heyday of the club racing back in the 60s. But we don't have room in our homes for gigantic Blue King tracks. So our tracks are downsized a bit, but they're still made the same way. And in fact, Dave and I recently did a series together of the building of one of the home tracks that I made for my house. And so if you're interested in building a track using a router and some MDF, that's a cool series to watch. Okay, so we're down into the club racing style of track. Let's talk about the tire compounds and what makes them effective.
Okay, there's various types, and so you start off with a original rubber tire that's put on the cars by the manufacturers. Those can be used. They can be sanded smooth and oiled with different oil compounds if your rules allow that.
Not super grippy though. The cars are pretty drifty. The rear end's sliding around.
Yeah, and there's good racing in that. It's not the fastest thing, but it's fun too. Not everybody's into modifying them. So that's the beginning of it, I'd say. And then the step up from that typically is what's called a slip-on silicone, and the good example of that is the tire on this car. It's called slip-on because that's how it goes. It slips right over the rim, and of course this one's going to give me a little trouble, but pops right on there, and you don't need any tools or anything to make it work, and that just increases the amount of traction that the cars have tremendously.
Really cool cars, by the way, these little Thunder slots.
Yeah.
Comes with a pretty significant racing guide on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Dave said, you slap those tires, and this thing it's a pretty quiet car, but it's pretty sneaky. It really zips around the track.
Yeah, they've got a 21,000 RPM motor, and they really move out. So next up from that in the silicone range is what's called coated silicones or coated foams. We take two different brands of silicone, what's called flowable windshield sealant, and which is what the silicone material was designed for. It can seal up your windshield on your car or your fish tank, either way, but it is a compound that comes out with a very, very grippy surface on it, and it's a little tricky to put on.
We're going to show you how that's done, by the way.
We're going to do that a little bit later. So typically what we take is a foam tire. And a foam tire is,
Kind of like this.
yeah, this is an example of what we would use on a hard plastic model type car where you want a semi-realistic looking wheel and tire. They've got a really nice foam that's been glued on there. It's a specific compound of foam rubber, and it's been trued, and you could use these out of the package if you're racing just on foam. But we'll take those for specific cars, namely the Scale Auto, and coat it with that silicone compound, and it just makes it tremendously more grippy. Other types of foam is what's supplied by companies like ProTrack for raceway style cars, and this is an aluminum wheel. I've got a plastic insert in there, but they've got various types of foam compounds that they glue on, and they trim them down and cut them up and sell them for raceway use. Those are typically run on a track that might be glued, or there may be a type of glue material attached or put on the tire. When I say glue, it typically is something like Bardol or STP engine treatment, and they take and thin it down with naphtha and either spray it on the track or apply it directly to the tires.
Kind of like putting honey all over the track. It makes it, especially in the turns, makes it pretty grippy, but it gets everywhere.
It gets everywhere. I remember one of the raceways I used to go to had a air conditioning filter intake thing on the ceiling, and after several of the big car races, there were tendrils of rubber and glue hanging down from the thing. We were breathing that. We don't do that too much here. We've gone to the more environmentally friendly tires.
Well, we can still make a mess, but not quite that bad.
True. And while talking about rubber tires, coated or not, this little guy here, these have come along recently. This is from a company called Polycar, and their parent company Slotted. It's a really, really nicely made, very true to scale little car. They've got a rubber compound tire that they use that comes on it, and these things, they're so nice. They're non-magnet, or if they have a magnet, you can take that out. We're running these just as is. We put a little bit of oil treatment into the rubber to help keep it softened up, because the rubber tends to dry out, as everybody knows, over time. So that's maybe one of the nicer things that's come along in recent times. And a lot of the 132nd cars are coming out with some really cool rubber tires. Typical Raceway foam tires were just a well, they call it fish rubber, or there's different compounds that they offered. Somebody back in the 60s had the smart idea of coating them with silicone to increase the amount of traction and get away from the glue that I spoke of. And so it kind of went away, and in the later times the stock cars went back to typical foam because it was inexpensive. Yes, this preserves the tires. The issue with the regular foam type tires is that if you don't use them regularly, they dry out like the tires on your car or whatever. So, guys have taken to storing them in the refrigerator or the freezer when they're not in use. And so you take them off, you put them in a little bottle, and you put the car away, and you come back when you're going to race it again, you find that tire, and you pull it out, put them back on. And hopefully they haven't degraded too much.
Okay, Dave, before we go to the bench, I know you had something you wanted to talk about, and that is the urethane tires. We really haven't talked about that yet.
Sure. What urethane is a different type of rubber material. It's different chemical compound, and in our group we only run a couple of classes of cars with these urethane tires. Much like the slip-on silicones that you can just take out of a package and put onto the existing wheel, these things are made in all kinds of sizes to do that with. I like to true them a little bit before I use them, something that you really can't do with a silicone tire. But they have, we don't use them much here, but urethane tires have a big market and a big following in Europe and in clubs around other parts of the world. They have a little bit less grip than the silicone type tire, but more grip than a standard rubber tire. So it's kind of an in-between. You've got to be a little bit careful with them. If you stretch them out too much, the tire can actually tear. And you want to be careful with the dust from sanding the urethane tires. From what I understand, it's not good for your health. But it has a big place in slot car racing. We just don't use it very much. Okay, just to give a little look at what used to be and where it's gone and how it's changed. Foam tires from the 60s were various colors. There were all kinds of different foam tires. Some guys would take and, before they mounted the foam donuts onto the aluminum rims, they would take and cut them into different pieces and glue them all together and turn them down on a tire lathe and make some interesting things that were kind of fun. And other than that, they would typically come in a solid color. These were red. That continued on for quite a while. And some original old orange ones on threaded tires, different brands of those. They would come from Parma or Champion or whoever. And the modern day version of the silicone coated tire is from a company called ProTrack. And here's an example of the product that they bring. And look at the finish on that. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but it is just beautiful. It's very thick. It is very glossy, and once this tire breaks in and is worn in enough for good traction, it lasts for a very, very long time. They've done a good job with that. So that's that. And then another old This is just a hard foam tire that came on some cars on a threaded wheel back in the day. And they were glued in place. Sometimes you can see yellowish glue material on the tires. Nowadays, they come from Scale Auto. You saw some larger versions of this that Stan showed for his car that we're going to coat and race tomorrow night. This is the small 1/32 scale tire that they produce, and is the same rubber compound and that. And we use a lot of these for our 1/32 race cars because they don't have the hub sticking out the back like some do, and it fits in the bodywork of more of the cars. And lastly, I want to talk about a product from a company called H&R. H&R has been producing a silicone tire with a nice silicone material. It's not the super grippy stuff that comes out of the tube. This is a compound that's preformed, and I talked about slip-on tires in a different segment of this. This is that type of tire on one of their wheels. These things are a lot of fun. They don't have the maximum grip, but when it's about the driving and you want to drift it around the corner a little bit and maybe not have the fastest cars running around, it's a nice tire. Nice thing that you can put on a heavy 1/24 car and get a good result.
Well, you know what? We've really talked about a lot of stuff for this episode, and it's getting really long. So I'm going to leave it right there this time. On our next episode, we're going to dive right in and actually see Dave put the silicone treatment on the tires. But hopefully this overview was really interesting to you to see the fascinating world of slot car tires and really how much they affect the amount of fun and performance you get out of your slot car. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be right here next time and hope you will be too.